Welcome to the Thresholds of Reality, the podcast where we explore unexplained and mysterious events, phenomena, and legends. Today we are joined by the president of the Expanded Awareness Institute, Scott Taylor, the guide to the afterlife. Strap in as we examine the edges of the unknown. Scott, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is an earlier episode, and we appreciate you being accommodating of the schedule.
Well, it's great for me because I'm on the East Coast, so this works really well.
Just lunchtime for you, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that intro where it talks about the edges of reality. I feel like that sometimes as we talk about shared death experiences and near-death experiences. You know, not many people are really intimately involved with that. So I appreciate both Sam and Kyle, two of you being able to have me on the show and, just talk about stuff that's cool.
This is something that's always fascinated me. And I've talked to Sam about this. I said, I would love to get somebody on to talk about this because for that exact reason, this is not something, death and near death. And it's always an avoided subject until it's right in your face with yourself, a family member, something like that. So this has always been a subject that's I've always wanted to have somebody just, be able to discuss it with.
Well, Kyle, that's really interesting because the statistics show that 40% of people have communication with a person who's made their final transition. And that's a remarkable statistic. And yet it's really not talked about much in our culture. So again, I'm really happy to be able to be here and throw a little light on that.
Yeah, this is going to be exciting.
So, I went through your website a little bit prior to the show, and one of the things that it talked about was near-death meditation.
Yes.
And that kind of phrase really stuck with me, near-death meditation, because it's something that, like, I'm familiar with the idea of a near-death experience where someone has had some kind of tragic accident, and they then experience something otherworldly or out of body, and then miraculously they revive or recover and share this notion or the experience that they had during the time that they were out of body or out of pocket, whatever. And the idea of like a near-death meditation seems like you're taking that concept of like the accidental near-death experience and trying to quantify it or make it more predictable.
Yes, exactly.
And experimental on your schedule rather than on a more chaotic schedule. Does that capture the idea? Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, I think that's chaotic is the key word there. So I have been studying near-death experiences for 30 years, long time. And in all of the thousands of people that I've interviewed, what happens is that near-death experiences happens to you. All of a sudden, you're walking across a frozen lake and you drop through into the cold water, and the next thing you know, you're in a place that you're totally unfamiliar with and you don't know what the rules are, and you're having this experience, and it's totally outside of your concepts, your belief structure, and so you kind of just go with it. Well, what we know now is that we can use certain forms of meditation to take us to those exact same places that near-death experiencers go to, but we do it under control. And we come in there and we have the time to be able to be in that space so that we become familiar with it. And we have the tools to learn how to navigate in that space. So it isn't happening to you, it becomes a co-creative effort. And boy, that just makes all the difference in the world.
So one of the things about a near-death experience is that the person's life is expiring or expired during the process. There's nothing dangerous about near-death meditation, is there?
No. No, it's actually based on, I had a shared death experience, which we'll maybe talk about a little bit later, the details of that. But a shared death experience happens, for me, it happened, I was bedside when somebody was making their transition, and I was invited to go with them as they made their final exit. And so, I mean, there was no trauma to me. I'm sitting on a windowsill, yet I get to participate in that. And when it was over, I came back to my physical body. And, you know, other than I'd had this incredibly unique experience, it certainly wasn't dangerous. I mean, I wasn't hurt or changed in any way. And I knew as a result of that, that if I did that, I just had this overwhelming sense that I could do it again. I just had to figure out a way to do it. And that's when I went on a search to find a meditation technique that would allow me to enter into the spaces that near-death experiencers go to and be there so that I have the time and have the tools then to navigate and like we were talking about, be able to have it be a co-creative exercise as opposed to something that just happens to you.
So what comes to my mind is, have you seen the movie Fight Club?
No, I haven't. Why?
So what happens is Edward Norton's character he's in this death and dying group, and they teach him to do this meditation where it takes him to another place. And like he goes to this place that's like, so it takes him away. So he's not focused on reality. And he's in this place where it's like ice and cold and, you know, and he uses that later in the movie to like get away from it, something that he's experiencing that's kind of bad. Is that kind of close to what this is? It takes you to this, like this other place.
Well, think about what near-death experiencers go through. There's a series of common elements that happens when you aggregate all of the data. You find that there is, you know, once you lift out of your physical body, there's often a guide, and that guide will escort you down the tunnel and you enter into the light. And when you're in that light, there is a reunion with your dead relatives, friends, pets, that kind of thing. And then an encounter with a divine being. And that divine being, you begin to understand what it means to be in that space of the afterlife, in the non-physical universe. And then that being takes you and has you experience a past life review or a life review. And from that life review, you get a chance then to go to the reception center, to that area of life between lives. And at some point, there is a line, a border that is to be crossed. Are you going to stay here permanently, or are you going to go back into the physical? There's a decision that needs to be made. So those are, in a really rough way, that's kind of the common elements that happen to people who've had near-death experiences. And what we do is each one of those has a particular vibratory rate. And what we've been able to do using binaural beat technology is to approximate that vibratory rate so that when you enter into that meditation, you're in the right space, you're at the right vibration to experience the tunnel or to experience the love of all that there is, or that life review, or the reunion with the relatives, which is awesome. So anyway, that's um, we we've gotten pretty good at it now, at being able to identify how um, how a typical NDE works, and what are the ways that we can enter into that experience so that we can do that ahead of time, and which makes it wonderful because you begin to realize, who we are as human beings, why we're here, and how we can make best use of life here in the physical world.
So is it better to do it early on in life, or does it you normally do it closer to end of life?
Um,
I
I so I think it happens when you're ready. You know that old expression, the teacher appears when you're ready.
mhm.
I think that applies to this too. That when somebody becomes curious about this, and that they have the drive, and let's use another word, you have the curiosity
Oh,
to experience that. Um, I've talked to so many people who have read books about near death experiences. They've read books about shared death experiences. They've listened to a zillion podcasts about people who've had that experience. And at some point, there's a click in their brain that says, I'm done knowing this in my head. What I want to do is to experience it. I want to have that sense of what it's like to be, say, in a unified state with the universe. When that when that switch happens, um, that's when I typically find people. They come to me. They wind up watching some of my podcasts, and so it's. Um, I think it just happens as you're ready.
Now, do you find that there are cultural differences in the way that people experience death, or is this process universal?
That is a great question. Um, yes, I find it to be cultural. Um, I had a conversation with Bruce Grayson not too long ago. He's like the number one scientific researcher into near death experiences. He founded the International Association for Near Death Studies, and studied with he headed up that department at the University of Virginia, right down the road from me. Anyway, so we were talking about this very same subject, and he says he thinks that everybody has the same experience. However, because of the metaphors that are stored in our brain, that is the only way that we can interpret that experience, is based on our own. So if you happen to be Hindu, you're going to run into deities that would be consistent with the Hindu religion. If you are Native American, you're going to run into your totems. If you're Christian, you'll maybe run into Mother Mary and Jesus. If you're agnostic, you may run into friends and families and divine beings that don't have um, a dogma attached to them. The experience underneath is essentially the same for everyone. It's just how we interpret those experiences that makes it relevant for us, so that we can understand what's going on as we're going through it. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Oh, that's fascinating. So something like a life review as you term it, may appear to a Christian as like the judgment, right? Judgment Day.
That is also a really good question, because in the life review, universally there is no judgment. It's one of the surprises that Christians come away from a life, or come away from the near-death experience. What they say is that there's usually a divine being that's with them, that loves them through the experience. Isn't that a nice phrase? Loves them through the experience. And the only judgment that happens as they go through reliving their life again is the experiencer is the only one judging the experience. So, if I'm going through it, I'm the only one that judges what happened to me. And the divine being that's with you typically asks one question over and over again. What did you learn from that experience? What did you learn from that experience? And so, what we divine from that is that what this is about is, how did we grow as a soul? How did that add to the human experience? How did we begin to understand how we added love into our lives? Did we live an authentic life? That's kind of how people answer the questions afterwards. But universally, there's no judgment except for what you do to yourself.
So having someone kind of look over your shoulder during the process doesn't result in any amount of guilt or shame, or does it to the people who go through it?
That's a really interesting way to phrase that. I'd use other words in that. When people go through this experience, they'll sit and they'll go, wow, I was, like really a jerk, maybe in a particular scene in our life. And as opposed to being guilty and shaming, what the divine being comes in and says, what did you learn from that? Well, I learned that, I could have approached it differently, and that might have had different results. So pause right here, because any of your listeners, what I'm going to say next is going to change everything. This is worth the price of admission right here. What happens is, say you're at a checkout at a grocery store, and the person who's checking you out can't seem to get the computer to work. And so you become snappy. Okay, that's the scene. And so you re-experience that scene, and you say to yourself, or say to the divine being, man, I could have done that differently. At this point, you can turn to the divine being and say, can I relive that scene differently? And the answer is yes, you can. So it's just like rewind, and you come up, and instead of being snappy, you say, it looks like you're having problems with that computer. Yes, I am. This is my first day of work, and Bob was supposed to teach me in this. He said it was intuitive, but it's really not. And you come in and go, you know what? There's always time to fix the paperwork. Do what you need to do, and we'll get through this together. So some compassion, some empathy. Maybe you say something like, we've all had a tough first day at work. We've all had to do a job, we had on our first day, and it didn't quite go. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Okay, so we relive that scene, this time being empathetic instead of being snappy. Here's the cool part, is that experience becomes part of my experience It becomes part of the human experience. It's as real as when we did it in the physical world the first time through. So this is like a spot where we can instantly fix our karma, if you want to call it that. So if there's scenes that you want to replay and replay and replay until you get it, understand it, figure out how it then took and played itself out in the life of the young girl behind the counter, or when she got home that night, or to her boyfriend. We can see how our actions roll out into community. We can see how it affects our human experience, because everything that we do goes up into this, I don't know, into this unified cloud. That's a metaphor for all of us. We all contribute. We all become smarter as a result of those who have gone on before us. And that's our job, is to learn as souls and add that knowledge to the collective human consciousness. So you get a chance and a chance and a chance, but you got to know about it ahead of time. And then the divine being will, guide you through it. They're very helpful, those divine beings. Ask them lots of questions. How could I have done that better? Anyway,
is that kind of the typical response? Are there any outliers that maybe they'll review a moment and say, I actually should have been more assertive or more aggressive in that moment in order to achieve a different outcome?
Yeah. So at some point, you're living a scene and you're saying, I could have done that better. I wish I'd had a different outcome. That played itself out in community in a way that I didn't intend. I would like to have it play out a different way. It also, let's not forget that when we come into this life, we come in to play a role. We have signed up for this life here in the physical. We've chosen our parents, our siblings, the situations that we encounter. And very often we are designed to play a particular role at a particular time. Now, maybe that was my job, was to be a jerk. And I did it beautifully because it clicked something in that young girl that wound up being very important to her later in life. So I did it perfectly. That was my job, was to be a jerk right then. And I get to see that. It's like, oh, that's what my role was. And so, I have when I make my final transition, one of the things that I would like to do is, I was raised Presbyterian, mainline Presbyterian church. I would love to meet Judas Iscariot. He's the one who betrayed Jesus.
Right.
And he did it beautifully. And in my worldview, there was a point where Jesus was organizing his life and saying, this is the role that I'm supposed to play in life, and I can't do it without somebody betraying me. Who would be that person? In my mind, it has to be Jesus's best friend, because who else would sign up for that duty? Who would not knowingly go in and have, the world hate them for 2,000 years? It had to be somebody who had such compassion for the mission of Jesus that they were willing to play that role. And that, I think, would be a terrific, talk about interviews, that would be a terrific interview. Let's call it a conversation when we're up there. So I have this sense of how we play different roles in our lives at different times. based on who we are and what's the role that should happen.
Okay. And so when people go through that experience, do you find that they come away generally with a different perspective on their life going forward, or and is it more of a kinder outlook, or do they have a different response to it?
When people leave their physical bodies and enter into the light, universally, what they'll tell you is that when they are touched by the light, they realize that everything is connected to everything else. I had a woman I was interviewing who told me that when she entered into this state, what she realized was that if she were to reach out and strike someone, that she would literally be striking herself, because we are that interconnected when in the non-physical universe. It's only here in the physical where we have this illusion of duality, this illusion of separateness, that we are inherently we are inherently a bit of the total humanity and universe, that we are that interconnected. So yes, so when people come back, they'll sit there and go, why have we organized our physical life this way? Why are we, that confrontational? Why are we that unconscious? Anyway, so yes, the short answer is yes, they have lots of insights about who they are. And yes, they come back and typically are gentler, have a real sense of how the divine works in the physical world, and how extraordinary love is, because that is the fundamental vibration of the universe, is that of love, and there just isn't anything else. So yeah, they come back profoundly changed.
Yeah, I remember that being a major plot point in like the revelation in the movie Interstellar, which is very scientific. And then ultimately it's like, it ultimately comes down to this connection via love that bridges, these very physical realms. And you're not the first person to talk about that I'm aware of. There's this idea of consciousness existing very similar to like an electron field, where you have these excitements in the electron field becoming what we know as electrons, and that consciousness is all excitement. Individual consciousness is excitements of kind of a field of consciousness, and that when we expire or die, that consciousness returns to the collective consciousness field, and is there awaiting a new excitement to join consciousness somewhere else. But
yeah, if I were to describe the physical universe, I would describe it as being ruled by the words both excuse me, either or. I'm me, you are, you are Sam, you are Kyle, and the three of us are separate. It's either me or it's you. But when we leave this physical body and enter into the world of unity, it's run by the words both and. So I am me, yes, and I am also part of the collective whole. So it's an interesting thing. I still get to be me. There is a consciousness that is Scott Taylor, but I am also part of this collective human consciousness. And frankly, the collect everything that is out there. I am a part of. Stephen Schwartz, who is a great philosopher in this area, talks about consciousness as being causal and fundamental, that it is the thing that is the universe. You can't get underneath, you can't get behind consciousness. It is the thing that all of the universe is created out of and from. It is, we are part of the God consciousness. We are part of that love consciousness. And it is the thing from which all matter is created. And I like this, that little thing you said about excited with the hand gesture and everything. Because what we know about consciousness is that, and this universe, is that it just sits there in potential. It's like always ready. And what puts it in motion is our thoughts, our intent. And so we intend for something to happen. When we intend to have something happen in our lives, and it kind of goes out into the universe, and then the universe reacts to it and helps bring that into our lives if it's appropriate. And so I like that idea that our consciousness has the ability to have the universe react to us. It's not the other way around. The universe doesn't just act on us. We have this intent, and that's how we create things. It's how we move around both the physical and the non-physical universe. Everything starts with intent. Cool.
So this is such a fascinating field. How did you wind up pursuing near-death experiences, near-death meditation? What brought you here?
So my personal story is now 40 years old. Seems remarkable. I was in love with a woman. Her name was Mary Frances, and she and her son Nolan had been sailing on Lake Washington in southern Minnesota. And on their way home from sailing, she was involved in a horrific car accident. Mary Fran was killed outright, and Nolan had this mortal head injury. And luckily, I mean, living in southern Minnesota, we weren't that far away from the Mayo Clinic, and both Mary Fran and Nolan were whisked away. And Nolan took 6 days to make his transition. And as it turns out, that 6 days wound up being important because Mary Fran was one of 9 kids, and it allowed people from all over the country to come and hold vigil for Nolan. And there were a lot of us. I mean, uncles and aunts and sisters and brothers, just a ton of us. And at some point, well, we had Mary Fran's older sister, Jannie, and I had this time that we spent with Nolan. We kind of divvied up and we all spent time with him. And we had the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. shift early in the morning on the 6th day. And we went in, we spent time with him, we read him stories. And at one point, Jannie, who is a trained emergency room nurse, went and looked at his chart, and she looked at all of the myriad of monitors that were up there, and she just shook her head and said, "Scott, it's time to say goodbye." And so we dragged a couple of chairs up by Nolan's head, and we told him that we we so honored him for his fight for his life, and that we loved him dearly. But if his mother should come to pick him up, remembering that Mary Fran died 6 days before, that if Mary Fran should come to pick him up, that it was okay for him to leave and go with her, that that would be the right thing to do. We said our goodbyes and left. And about 45 minutes later, the nurse came into the waiting room. We all 40, 50 of us were ushered into this small room. And as it turns out, I was one of the last people to come into that room. And I sat on the windowsill. And I don't know if you've ever been with anybody who's made their transition, but in Nolan's case, it was slow and very peaceful. And really all I had to do for about 45 minutes was watch the heart monitor, do that thing. And it just slowed and slowed until it eventually flatlined. And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, and she scooped Nolan up out of his physical body, and they had a reunion that was exquisite. It was so joyful, and it would be what you would expect between a mother and child who had been separated, and that he was coming home. And I was, I'm just sitting there on the windowsill, and I was surprised because I got to feel that reunion. And then I was taken aback as the two of them then turned to me, embraced me, and the three of us left and went to the light. And I have never experienced anything quite as extraordinary. It was joy. It was ecstasy. It was a reunion. It was requited love. It was, I am part of them, and they're a part of me, and I'm a part of everything. It was this time that we were gifted, and we had a chance to say goodbye properly. We had a chance to be with one another as we were in that space. And then at some point, it felt complete, that we had affirmed our love for one another, and we said our goodbyes, and it was okay. And the two of them turned and went further into the light, and I came back to my physical body. So that's part A of the story. There's a B, but I thought maybe I'd pause here just see if you had any questions.
Oh, it's such an emotional moment, and well, thank you for sharing that. And my initial response is trying to choke back the tears. I mean, that's so powerful. So during that moment, and this is just, almost a base question, but during that moment, what happened to you physically? Were you in kind of a trance?
Good question.
Yeah.
Because thank you for that segue. That is part B. So part B is I'm sitting there on the windowsill, and my consciousness has left, and I'm up with Mary Fran and Nolan, and we're together in the light. But at the same time, I am also fully present in the room with all of the other relatives. I didn't have a word for it then. I do now. It's called bilocation. I had two separate distinctive consciousness that were operating on all cylinders. So there was me that was with Mary Fran and Nolan, and there was me that's sitting there on the windowsill next to Mary Fran's brother, Willie. And I know this because I was really inappropriate for the room, which means I'm having this experience of love and joy and ecstasy and exuberance. And I mean, I'm in this amazing, wonderful space, and I'm having a chance to communicate with two people that I lost 6 days before. So my face was, it was joyous. It was like all of the love of the universe was inside my body and it was trying to break out through my face. So if anybody had looked at me, they would have said, what's going on with Scott? You know, that we're all sad and he's not. So what I did was I took and I covered my face with my hands because it was the only thing I could think of to do that would allow me to be in the space I needed to be in. And then when I came back to my physical body, it took a moment to get myself together again, and I could lower my hands and be with the other grieving relatives and hug them and just be there in that complete sorrow after having lost the two of them. So yes, I was fully present in the room, and I was fully present with Mary Fran and Nolan.
That's incredible. I think it's what the most incredible part is. You got to do what most people wish that they could do when a family member or someone special to them passes away. They get to see that and be able to do that last goodbye.
Yeah.
And I think if more people was able to do that, I think there would be less. Yes, we're going to grieve because they've, we're not going to see them anymore. But you got that last moment to understand what's actually going on. And I think if you got to be able to experience that, it wouldn't be as scary.
It's not as scary. Well,
or grieve. The grieving process would be, I think, less because you almost have that closure of where they went.
It'd be different for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to tell you that it's an odd sort of thing because at the moment of my greatest grief, I'm in my greatest joy. And so, I have just lost Nolan. I mean, he's a precious child. He's 7 years, just turned 7. And, I lost Mary Fran, 6 days before. So, I'm in this profound state of grief, and yet I am in their love. I am in the love of the universe at the same time. And so for me now, the two emotions are absolutely interlinked. It's like when I'm telling you this story, sometimes, I get a little teary-eyed, and it's because it's joy. I'm entering back into that space again, and it's about loss. So it's both. And Kyle, you raise a really good point. This is a hats off to William Peters. Hang on. Oop. So William Peters wrote this extraordinary book called At Heaven's Door. He's the first researcher to really write about what happened to me, to write about shared death experiences and do a really thorough job of thorough meaning statistically significant. He had 800 people that he interviewed for this book. And what he discovered during the course of this is that if you want to, you can program that to be with somebody, to have this shared death experience. And there are 4 prerequisites that go with that. First is that you have to have a heart connection with that person. And in my case, I certainly had a heart connection with Nolan and with Mary Fran. So I got like double dose on that one. Secondly, is that the experiencer, me, needs to be receptive and open. And so that means that I'm not, chatting with somebody, actively grieving, talking with the doctor, whatever. In my case, I was just sitting on a windowsill, watching the heart monitor, so I was kind of in a meditative state anyway, because there wasn't anything really going on. This also happens to people because they were resting or sleeping or driving a car or, something that doesn't demand a lot. So they're open and receptive to the experience. And then, and this is the key, is that the invitation has to come from those making the transition to the experiencer. So in my case, that would be Nolan making the invitation to me. Maybe it was a joint. Maybe it was Mary Fran and Nolan, because they embraced me. Because what it seems to be is that you have to change your vibratory level quickly. You're there, and all of a sudden, boom, they raise up your vibratory level to that state that is the state of the afterlife. It's really hard to be in the physical and to go, oh, now is the time I raise my vibratory level up, and to what? You just don't know. But it's a lot easier for those that are making their final transition to adjust their vibratory rate to me and then bring me along with them. Lastly, if people want to do this, you arrange it ahead of time, and it goes like this. So if I was going to have this experience with my wife, Anne, and I'm the one that's making the transition, when I go through my life review, there will be a scene where Anne and I meet on the corner of 11th and LaSalle in downtown Minneapolis. That's where we met. And when I go through that scene, Anne and I have agreed that that's the trigger scene. So I'm going through it. The trigger comes up. Oh, that's my reminder to reach back into the physical world, grab Anne, and have her come with me on the rest of the journey, or as much as is appropriate. So there's agreement. Yes. When I meet Anne at the corner of 11th and LaSalle, I reach back and come get her. So those are the 4 kind of requirements. And William Peters has had several of these himself because of his work in AIDS clinics, and has kind of divined this out over the course of years and teaches that technique in his courses. So we can do it. We can do it, Kyle. It's like everything else. If you know how, then let's arrange it and see if we can make it work.
I was just thinking to myself as you're explaining this, I was like, man, there's at least, there's a few people I was thinking, what moment could I talk to them about? So like my grandmother, she's 85, and I was like, I was thinking, next time I see her, I've had the conversation of when it's scrolling and you're there at my birth, can you make that the trigger?
Sure.
And then, and then I was thinking the same thing of, okay, then now I'll have the discussion with my wife. So I'm glad you explained that, because I want to be able to have that with a few different people.
Yeah, and it's easy when you sit there and go, okay, so what's the significant moment between the two of us? Maybe it was the first kiss with your wife, or you met her at a high school dance, or, the birth of your first child. I don't know. You pick something.
Yeah.
And you go, that's the event that's going to trigger me to reach back into the physical world and go get your partner. Because I have to say, most of the people when they talk, excuse me, most of the people when they talk about, leaving their physical body and going down the tunnel, they're so into it. There's like, this is just an amazing experience. The tunnel is so cool, and there's all my dead relatives. Like about the last thing on your consciousness is what's going back in the physical, and so it takes a reminder.
That's, as if only more people knew that, it would just be. It truly would make death a whole different experience for both parties.
Yeah.
Because that's most everybody's fear is dying. That's what happens. I don't know what happens. I'm scared that what happens. And having a little bit of knowledge, I think, really makes it an easier. It takes the burden away a little bit.
So there was a quote that I ran across from Woody Allen, of all people. And he said, I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be around when it happens. and that's the truth. And in many cases, what we know, pick car accidents, or actually the very first recorded near-death experiences happened in the late 1800s. It was a group of guys that were climbing the Matterhorn, and during their ascent, they were at a spot where they were doing ice climbing, and this warm weather just blew in, and it turned the whole side of the mountain into just this slippery mess. And they fell off the mountain. They couldn't maintain their grip anymore. And as they're falling through the air, they explained it later. They looked down and went, "Oh, I don't want to be here when I land. This is not going to be good." And so their souls just jumped out of their bodies, and they went on to have a near-death experience. So when they landed, their consciousness actually wasn't in their physical body. Well, little did they know, at the bottom of the mountain, all of this snow had fallen off the mountain, and it was cushy, and they landed in this poof of snow. Now, they were hurt, but they lived through it. But we see that happen in car accidents. It's like, oh my God, here comes a car, pop. So very often we aren't around when the final deed happens, if it's a sudden death kind of thing. So take heart, everyone.
Yeah, that's good news.
Yeah, it's good news.
The conversation is so delightful here. So the process of the near-death meditations that you conduct, what is the purpose that your clients come to you with? What are they trying to find?
So about half of them have had some sort of experience. Maybe it's a near death or a spiritually transformative or shared death experience, and they want to know more about it, and they want to go back to that space again. I mean, that's a really keen after effect. That's what happened to me. Was after my experience with Mary Fran and Nolan, I knew that if I had been in that, if I did it once, I could do it again. I just had to figure out how. So when people come, the other half of the people come, they're just flat out curious. There are, many ways to experience the non-physical universe. Meditation, through the centuries has been really good for that. But what I figured out was that people who have had near-death experiences, and it's somewhere between 5 and 10% of the U.S. population. That's a lot of folks. Energetically, they have worn this path from the physical world to the non-physical world, and it's really well known and it's really well traveled. And so, if we're able to plug into it, the journey's easy, and because it's been so well traveled, it's like being on an escalator. Really, you put yourself on the escalator, and it takes you where you need to go. So people who come want to experience aspects of the afterlife. Maybe they're just interested in exploring the non-physical universe, because this is a great way to enter into that. You mentioned that, some people are really afraid to die. And I've had a couple of people who've come and just said, I have this unreasonable fear and I want to get over that fear. And probably the last chunk is that last chunk of people, they've had somebody significant that has left the physical world. They made their final transition, and they would like to touch base with them again. They would like to know they're okay. They'd like to know what they're doing, or, what do they have to tell us about how to live life in the physical now that they're on the other side. And so that communication with loved ones is another reason that you would do this form of meditation, so that you could, be okay with, Grandma Jenny. She's doing just fine. Thank you very much. So that becomes, it becomes a really healing exercise that way.
Yeah.
I have one more quick question.
Yeah.
It's so, a lot of people talk about, like they're in this state of sleeping and they kind of see their soul leave their body and look at them. I was talking about this with some family members on Christmas Eve, and a lot of people get scared and they freeze and they don't know what's going on. And then I was talking to like my father-in-law, and he was like, what he used to do when that would happen is he would let it drift and let himself drift up, almost like he was leaving. Is that kind of the same thing as this meditation to help you go with the divine, or is that something completely different?
No, it can be part of it. So when people have this experience, typically it's an out-of-body experience. You've heard that term, where your consciousness leaves your physical body and off you go, and you travel around with or without a guide, and it's your intent that takes you where you want to go. When I teach it, that particular skill takes a while to learn. So when I teach it, I teach what happened to me. I teach them how to bilocate, how to be in their physical body and be somewhere else at the same time. It's actually really easy to learn. And so that allows us to be anchored here in the physical. So there's no concern for our physical body, but it allows us also to fully experience what is happening in the non-physical universe. And so, all of the kinds of experiences that happen to near-death folks are available to us. You want to go to the tunnel, you want to go to the reunion, you want to meet the divine being, you want to do the life review, blah, blah, blah. So you
actually teach control of it.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is that there are tools that you can use very successfully to visit all these aspects of the non-physical universe. So way back at the beginning of the universe, or of this interview, we talked about, is it happening to you, or is it a co-creative exercise? And that's what I teach, is how do we have it be our intent? I want to go see Grandpa Paul. Well, how do I go see Grandpa Paul and not, Uncle Fred? Well, there's techniques to do that. There's techniques to working with guides. Frankly, that is the most wonderful thing you can learn anyway, is how to use guides, because this is their world. And you go, guide, I'd really like to go see, Uncle PJ. So can we make that happen? And they'll take you there.
It's awesome.
So
I think so.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It only took me 15 years to figure out how to do it, but now we're good.
So I wanted to go ahead and put up your website, neardeathmeditations.com.
Yep.
And so if people want to reach out to you, can they do so through this website?
Yep. There's a contact page there, and I answer all my emails. So, drop me a note. I've got albums to help people kind of dip their toe in. We've got 2-day workshops, and we have a 5.5-day workshop where we make that transition probably 25 times. And at the end of it, you're really familiar with what it's like, what it will be like to leave your physical body for the last time. You'll know what to do. And
you said you do podcasts as well, right?
Yeah. It's shockingly, it's called the Afterlife Files.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. It's kind of a little tongue in cheek, and we have a ton of fun. I have researchers on there. I've got experiencers on there. I've got one episode where it's kind of like this one, where somebody interviewed me for my own podcast. So I get to tell the story. So yeah, it's a ton of fun, and please go and subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, and we could use the help.
Where can they find it? Is it audio, video? Is it?
Yes, it's both. Go to YouTube. That's the most fun
Perfect.
place. And then just type in the Afterlife Files, or you can type in Scott Taylor, although there's some very funky people out there named Scott Taylor, so you have to weed your way through there. The Afterlife Files is probably the easiest thing to do when you go onto YouTube.
I know a Scott Taylor. He dropped out of my dodgeball league. So when you say they're questionable people, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So there's a very far right politician. It's Scott Taylor. There's a male porn star. I mean, I got all kinds.
Hey, you know what? They're all welcome here. Anyway,
I just subscribed to your YouTube channel. I'm excited.
Thank you.
And I will do so as soon as we get off the stream here. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. It was a very touching story, very powerful story. It's not often that I'm moved like I was during the podcast. So I thank you so much. And for our listeners, please reach out. Please subscribe to the Afterlife Files and check out the offerings that Scott's got at his website, neardeathmeditations.com. And if you enjoyed this show, please give us a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. And until next time, keep on exploring the edges of the unknown.
Sam and Kyle, thank you. This has been just a hoot. I really appreciate the invitation to be on.
This was incredible. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
All right.